Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today, we take a deeper dive into the Nikhil Gupta interview, how his supposed answers stack up in the real world. And we also look a little more behind the scenes of the Sunday Guardian and its connection with the Indian government. Well, we also discuss interesting revelations about India's behind-the-scenes pressure on the US government to leave Sheikh Hasina alone before her recent escape from an angry populace. And elections have at last been announced in J&K, but are they really what they seem? Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. Thanks for all the amazing comments and keep them coming.
Indeed, and together we'll be bringing you our daily perspective on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. Of course, as usual, we will be taking a look at lots of your wonderful comments which have been flooding in, so thanks as always for all those. But let's get on with the show. James, what are you going to start us off with today?
Well, Mr. Gupta, that interview the other day was such a joke. I just found a bunch of points and I actually took the time to go through it in a lot more depth today. And I mean, right now it seems like he's trying the so typical American response to charges, and that is trial by media. He's speaking out to the media, complaining about a lot of things. Of course, NewsX is blowing it up, taking things that he said and exaggerating it. We didn't expect anything less. But he's shocked about how they're treating him in New York's Metropolitan Detention Center. Imagine that. They're treating him like any other prisoner. Who would have thought such a thing? So he's claiming that there were 4 murders and 25 assaults or stabbings in the prison since he's been there, or the detention center. And of course, this is par for the course in the American jail system. I hate to say it, but even the United Nations has been calling on the US to deal with their overpopulation, their understaffing, and the levels of violence within the prisons. And this is not something new. He claims that he's in the worst prison in the United States. And I hate to break it to him, but there are much, much, much worse. This doesn't even break the top 20. So he wants to get moved. So I'd be careful what you wish for, because he could get moved to a much worse prison than that. He is also going on to claim that he has never been charged or arrested for a crime in India or anywhere else in the world. This, of course, I touched on last night. Well, you know, it's not uncommon for the governments, whichever government it is, when they're sending in operatives or people to act on their behest, to go for people that are going to fly under the radar. They don't want people that have lengthy criminal records. They want people with a clean record that won't be found online if they get stopped at customs and immigration. Very common sense approach in the real world. So let's bring up here, as I discussed, some of the conditions that he is whining about in terms of how he's being treated and what the facility is. Now, this is a quick video that was that's from Google Earth, and this just shows the exterior of the facility and where he's at. He's complaining about not having a legal team yet. Well, apparently he has applied to the public defender. He has to wait like anybody and everybody else in the system. He has to wait until someone is assigned to him. And this is, you know, just par for the course with the U.S. justice system. But something that he seems to have forgotten is that he has the right to remain silent. And this is something that every lawyer is going to tell him, no matter where they are or who assigns them or who pays for them. I mean, he's got the right to remain silent, and he's choosing not to exercise that right in speaking to the media, because this can come back as evidence and bite him in the ass. He's going on about Mr. Poonen and NewsX, making all these accusations about him being a drug dealer, about him being a terrorist, and really pushing that narrative. Now, if Mr. Putin had been a terrorist that the India government actually had real credible evidence, then the US would not waste their time looking elsewhere. They would be staring right at him. They would be following him. They would be right up in his life to make sure that he's not planning anything against the United States as he is a citizen there. They would be all over him, and they're not. And that's because India has failed to show any credible evidence, and that's why he's never been sent to India or extradited, is because there is no evidence of any crimes. Mr. Putin has been the subject of many accusations by the India government, but so have so many others. If you speak out against the Modi government or against others in power, then you are labeled a terrorist. They accuse you of sedition, all kinds of different things. So again, take it with a grain of salt is basically my theory on that. Because it obviously, if they had evidence, as I said, he would have been extradited, and the U.S. definitely would be all over him in a very heavy investigation. He claims that he is a normal, everyday business person. Well, that is also typical of criminal activity. When you look at criminals who are higher up in the food chain, and I'm not talking street thugs, I'm talking about organized crime or those who are leading a group, they tend to have business assets. This allows them to receive payments, to filter it through the business, to explain their income on an annual basis, as well as to launder their money. Plain and simple. It's not, the street thugs that we would expect to be at this level. We would expect organized crime or people who have at least some legitimate business interests that they can verify to foreign governments when they enter their country. When you look at his claims that he is innocent, I mean, we saw this in the old movies where the one-armed man did it. And of course, if you go to any prison in the world, 95% of the inmates are innocent if you ask them. So, I, again, don't even bother listening to that because obviously there is the evidence that brought him into that facility. He complains that there's no moral support. Well, what does he expect? The Dallas cheerleaders to be there at his cell to cheer him on? Of course, there's no moral support from the government or from the U.S. government. That is not their job. Their job is to investigate and to prosecute. And if he is looking for moral support, there are visiting hours, there are phones, there are many ways that he can get moral support from his friends or associates and family. I mean, it's not up to the governments at either side to offer him the moral support. That's up to his family, his friends, and others that he can rely on. He complains further that the Prague court would not hear his accusations of political involvement and influence in his case. He was very simply told that this was a court process to review evidence and whether or not they met the threshold of proof to extradite him back to the U.S. It was not there to entertain anything other than facts and evidence. And his theories just were not going to be heard there. He also complained that the judge was replying to him in Czech language and he was speaking Hindi. But again, I don't see that as anything to do with more than just finding reasons to complain because obviously the judge understood him. He understood the judge and the process. They had to have qualified interpreters there. So again, I don't know where that complaint is really taking him to. And I'm going to jump ahead a bit here, and you can always scroll through this later on yourself. There's a bit of information there, but again, he's complaining about the violence. Again, it's the U.S. justice system, the U.S. federal prison system. Could be it. And he goes on to talk about his false arrest and false charges, how he's being used as a political pawn. But there are remedies for this. Should it ever come out that he's exonerated of these charges, which I doubt will ever happen, but if, playing a devil's advocate, there is a civil justice system in place that allows a falsely accused individual and a falsely imprisoned individual to go after the malicious prosecution of themselves and to get financial and other compensation through the justice system. So there are things in place for that. Once again, I mean, if I was him, I would be keeping my mouth shut until I actually had an attorney and a legal team that will no doubtedly be appointed by the public defender's office, because that is a legal right in the U.S. If they failed to provide him with legal counsel, this whole case could be dismissed and he would be free to walk away. So they are not about to let him walk away by a simple error of not providing him a lawyer. It's just ludicrous to think that that's going to happen. So that was basically my take on the whole interview and the whole situation there, and my response to a lot of the points that he brought up that I just thought were retarded. And then, there was NewsX bringing up repeatedly how he's being mentally, physically, and other forms of torture. And yet Mr. Gupta himself in his responses never used the word torture, never insinuated that. He said that it's an inhumane system, it's an inhumane place, it's so many other things. But that is the justice system, that is the prison system. But again, he did not ever claim torture like several news agencies are trying to accuse the U.S. of being involved in. So that's my take on it, Angus. I just thought now that we had a bit more time than last night that I would share that opinion and the breakdown of what I got out of the interview.
Yes, thank you, James. Interesting analysis of something that, well, I think the question is, how seriously do we take this interview? And I think the reality is actually not very. And I'll talk shortly about the rag, the newspaper in which it was printed. But if we take the interview at face value, as you have quite rightly done so, James, is that clearly shock, prisoner pleads innocence. That's really the whole story. There's no surprise here. He also, he pleads innocence to being an agent of, even an unwitting agent of Indian intelligence. Well, I think it's very unlikely that the US Department of Justice would have gone to such great lengths and great expense to have extradited Mr. Gupta from the Czech Republic if they actually felt he was just a bit part in this overall conspiracy. Clearly, he is a key linchpin. He is a key character in this chain of command, let's call it, that has been questioned and has been. I suppose there are suspicions that this chain does lead all the way back up to the Indian government. So it is very important for the US government to detain Mr. Gupta and actually really just sap him for all the information that he clearly contains. I think if we do look at some of his accusations, I think we cannot deny that the US prison system is not, shall we say, working at its optimum. That is without question. It's quite often displayed on UK media as well as US media and of course Canadian media. We see some pretty shocking films that come out of conditions in US prisons. But unfortunately, that is prison. Prison is not supposed to be a nice place. And of course, contrast that with, let's say, prisons in India. And I don't think we need to draw any comparisons to even be able to come to a conclusion on that one. I know which side of the world I'd rather be in prison if I had to be in prison. And immediately refer to all those currently residing in detention in Indian prisons without trial. Amritpal Singh, Jagtar Singh Johal, etc., etc. So the one thing that Mr. Gupta cannot complain about is he is going through a legal due process. He has a chance of going to trial and being released as innocent, if indeed he is innocent, unlike Mr. Amritpal Singh, Jagtar Singh Johal, etc., who still retain in jail years without trial. There is a clear comparison. India has absolutely no leg to stand on if it has any complaint about what's going on with Mr. Gupta, legally speaking. So, I've talked about the conditions in US prisons. Well, yeah, they're awful. Sorry, but that's what happens in prison. What he cannot complain about, and what is important here, is the actual due legal process that put him in prison. He cannot complain about the legal process because the US legal process, it is a mature, it is an evolved, and it is a very successful legal process that works. It is not absolutely watertight or perfect. There is no system that is, but it remains one of the leading legal systems on this planet, alongside the UK, Canada, and of course most first world countries. It has a legal system that works. Importantly, there are countless human rights groups who are residents in the US who will ensure that Mr. Gupta gets a fair trial, gets a fair hearing, and is legally representative. There is absolutely no way, and as of course you alluded to, James, there is no way even the prosecutors would allow him not to get a fair trial, because they cannot afford for Mr. Gupta to get off on a technicality. It has happened in the past. They will be absolutely pulling out every possible effort to ensure that Mr. Gupta does get a fair trial, that he cannot wriggle off on a technicality. So I will absolutely guarantee there will his legal situation will be watertight, as checked from every possible angle, even the prosecution. So also, his complaints about his process in the Czech Republic. He went through several hearings in the Czech Republic. Likewise, the Czech Republic is a mature democracy. It has a mature and evolved legal system based on the legal systems that span across the European continent and the European Union. There is absolutely no way he did not receive any form of unfair trial in the Czech Republic. He went through several hearings. He had countless legal teams representing him and defending his case from every possible angle, whether realistic or unrealistic. So again, it has been shown all the way through his whole legal process, he has not been treated unfairly at any stage of this whole process. So, and this whole concept about being a political pawn. Is he a political pawn? He's so down the chain. I don't honestly believe that he is that important enough. I think he's flattering himself to call himself a political pawn. Yeah. He is an important asset in this whole chain of command. He is somebody that I have absolutely no doubt the US intelligence want to get their hands on, because they want to, as I say, drain him of all the knowledge that he has, because clearly they are suspicious that there is a link between Mr. Gupta all the way through CC1 and all the way up to Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor in India, and of course potentially higher than Mr. Doval. So yeah, they want to find out this evidence. As we said yesterday, the question is, will that evidence come out in the public domain? Probably not, for diplomatic reasons, but it will be very powerful evidence if indeed it does come out. So yeah, James, that's an interesting analysis. I think I don't think Mr. Gupta has much to complain about. He has a lot to fear. The question is, will he be doing a deal if indeed he is guilty? And as we said yesterday, he is innocent until proved guilty. If indeed he does have evidence, if he does have information that is extremely valuable to the US administration, I dare say it will be a sensible move on his part to let it out, to hand it over to the US administration in return for a more lenient sentence. But yeah, thanks, James, for that.
Yeah, and if anything, I think that they're going to be more guarded around him to make sure that he is there to speak out and to make a deal when the time comes. So I think he's actually probably more protected than most of those who are incarcerated at this facility. So.
Yeah, that's a very good point, James. I suspect that because he is such a valuable asset to US intelligence, there is no way they would allow any danger to come to Mr. Gupta. As you say, I think he will be extremely well protected in prison by the authorities to ensure that no harm does come to him. They want that information from him. So, yeah. Interesting. Thanks for that, James. Okay, well, I'm going to start today with another take on the story as well. And this is just a look a little bit more behind the scenes of this interview. And of course, this interview appeared in a newspaper called the Sunday Guardian. Now, we've talked a lot about Indian media and its partisan nature, its alliance and its loyalty to the BJP and the RSS administration in India. It's very rare that you will see any criticism of the ruling administration, and when there is criticism, it's fairly well guarded, or it's, should we call it harmless criticism. In other words, yes, we do know that the Indian media is essentially a pet project of the Indian government. So the Sunday Guardian, in which this interview appeared, is one of these pet media, and it is owned by a gentleman called Vinod Sharma. Vinod Sharma is a wealthy and influential member of parliament from Haryana, and has quite an interesting background. And there are clear links between Vinod Sharma and the, let's call it the higher caste, the ruling Brahmins, the RSS, etc., those who look after India in a euphemistic way. Basically, he is very well connected. He is a very powerful individual. He swings a lot of weight in India. But in turn, he also has become quite a useful tool of the Indian administration himself. So one of the interesting links here, and one of the, I would say, significant pieces of evidence that shows how embedded Vinod Sharma is with the Indian establishment. This an incident happened just over 20 years ago. His son was accused, charged and imprisoned over a very nasty crime. And it happened in 1999, specifically on the 30th of April 1999. A 34-year-old model, a lady called Jessica Lal, was shot dead in the early hours, 2 a.m. on the 30th of April 1999. She was working as a celebrity barmaid at a very well-attended socialite party in New Delhi. And she was shot dead in front of dozens of witnesses. All these witnesses pointed to a gentleman called Siddharth Vashisht, who also happened to be known as Manu Sharma, who also happened to be the son of Vinod Sharma, the owner of the Sunday Guardian. Now, Manu Sharma, after all these witnesses came forward and said, yeah, clearly it was this young man who shot this model dead, he was then later convicted for the murder and sentenced to life in prison. But here's the twist in the tale. Manu Sharma was actually, went to trial, first of all, accused of this murder, and he was acquitted. He actually got off, despite all these witnesses, the eyewitnesses, coming forward to say they watched Manu Sharma shoot this model dead. He was acquitted in this first trial, and this led to a huge uproar across India. Despite strong circumstantial evidence to convict him, they, of course, questioned the acquittal, claiming it was not based on merit. Basically, all these people across the nation said, hang on a second, all this evidence, even the eyewitnesses, pointed to Manu Sharma being the man who pulled this trigger, and yet he got off in the trial. And there was even talk around this time that Vinod Sharma, his wealthy father, an influential father, actually offered money. He tried to bribe witnesses. He also apparently tried to bribe a gentleman, a Sikh as it happened, to take the rap, to take the blame for it in place of his son. But of course, following massive media and public pressure, the prosecution itself appealed after this acquittal. They appealed, and the Delhi High Court conducted proceedings on a fast track with daily hearings conducted over 25 days, and that original trial court judgment was overturned. Manu Sharma was found to be guilty of having murdered Lal, and he was then finally sentenced to life imprisonment on the 20th of December 2006. So this is 7 years after the original murder. And then he was finally released in June in 2020, 4 years ago, after serving just under 14 years. And he was released from Tihar jail by Delhi LG on grounds of good behaviour. So if you ever need evidence of the interconnectedness of the wealthy and powerful in India, that this guy who owns a Sunday Guardian, Vinod Sharma, who's an MP, clearly very wealthy, a very successful businessman, with very strong connections to not just the Indian government, but clearly to the judiciary. He had the power to overturn and actually get his son acquitted of a very clear murder charge back in 1999. That's how much power that Vinod Sharma wields in India. And it was only down to public pressure and the absolute utter outrage that somebody like this could get off a very clear murder charge, that his murder charge actually then stood successfully in the second attempt. So one wonders what connections Vinod Sharma does have with the Indian establishment, and in turn one wonders what favours the Indian establishment are now pulling on Vinod Sharma. If Sharma has managed to get his son acquitted of murder in the first instance, he must have pulled in some pretty big favours with the Indian establishment, and in turn the Indian establishment sees Vinod Sharma as a very useful tool to push their agenda. Vinod Sharma owns at least the Sunday Guardian. He is a bit of a media mogul, so of course he wields a lot of influence in the public domain. So yeah, the twist in this tale is this interview of Nikhil Gupta, which paints a very one-sided narrative of big bad USA, that India is innocent, Nikhil Gupta is innocent. How dare the US accuse Nikhil Gupta and the Indian government of all these nasty crimes? Well, of course, one has to see which newspaper it appeared in. It appeared in basically a mouthpiece of the Indian government, James. So I think it doesn't take a genius to work out the agenda behind this interview, if indeed this interview was even genuine in the first place.
That's what I was just going to add to that, Angus, is the fact that it was apparently the questions delivered by an intermediary, and then the intermediary brought the responses. I mean, obviously they would have to apply to do a real interview with him inside the correction center. They probably would never allow that, being that it is pre-trial. So yeah, I just wonder the legitimacy of the whole thing.
Yes, indeed. I do find it highly suspicious, as you say. The whole structure of the interview was very simplistic, should we say. It's not a very natural interview. It is almost like it's just a few questions have been drafted and some answers scripted, and he's just sort of said, yeah, okay, I'm happy with that, even if indeed he did get his permission to show it. So yeah, interesting. But anyway, as our story unfolds, we will, of course, bring you news when more interesting snippets come out and more evidence behind the scenes comes out. Okay, let's move on. And again, let's stay with the US and India relations. And here's an interesting story that was released by the Washington Post. The Washington Post they've got a great team of investigative reporters, and they've always come out with some very interesting stories. They've clearly got some good connections with the intelligence world and the world of diplomacy, because they do seem to come out with some very interesting behind the scenes and well-researched and seemingly well-supported stories about things that go on behind the scenes with between these respective governments. And the latest one of course relates to Sheikh Hasina, the recently deposed head of the Bangladesh government, who fled in fear, literally fled the country, chased by mobs of angry rioters, clearly unhappy with her 14-year regime. She was accused of all sorts of nasty things. She was accused of some pretty serious anti-democratic things. She was accused of extrajudicial killings, of imprisoning her political opponents, etc., etc. Yes, how familiar that story is. The Washington Post has come out with quite an interesting article. I'll quickly run through some of the key points that this article raised. And they said that they believed that Indian officials had quietly been pressuring the US government behind the scenes to stop applying US pressure on Sheikh Hasina, to leave her alone, basically. So the story runs that US diplomats had apparently been haranguing, they've been pressuring Sheikh Hasina for jailing thousands of her rivals and critics ahead of the elections that happened in January. Now, the Biden administration had been sanctioning a Bangladeshi police unit under Hasina's command, who were accused of carrying out extrajudicial abductions and killings. They'd threatened to impose visa restrictions on Bangladeshis in reaction to this, who'd undermined democracy or committed human rights abuses. But apparently, in a series of meetings, Indian officials demanded that the US tone down its pro-democracy rhetoric. They were telling the US, whoa, hang on. You're pushing this pro-democratic rhetoric about Bangladesh. You're putting Sheikh Hasina under pressure because she's being undemocratic. Please don't do that. Back off. And India argued that if the opposition were allowed to gain power in an open election, that's the BNP, Indian officials argued that Bangladesh would then become a breeding ground for Islamist groups posing a threat to India's national security. So what India were arguing with the US is no, hang on, keep Sheikh Hasina in power, despite the fact that she is clearly guilty of extrajudicial killings, that her democratic credentials are very, very poor. She is basically undemocratic, but would rather you keep her in power than let the BNP in power, who we fear may actually let Islamist militants grow their power base. So clearly quite a big story going on behind the scenes here. And India said it was a core concern for them. And you can't take India as a strategic partner unless we have some kind of strategic consensus. So they're pulling a little bit of diplomatic blackmail here. India basically said, look, if you want us as a strategic partner, then you have to basically do as we want. And the Biden administration, therefore, substantially softened its criticism, and they shelled threats of further sanctions against Hasina's government, disappointing many in Bangladesh. And US officials said it was a calculated decision that had little to do with, they claim, Indian pressure. So basically, it turns out that the Biden administration went soft, they weakened. And this is no surprise, I have to say, actually. Biden's administration has been often accused of being a bit soft in its foreign policy. And clearly here that India's applied a bit of pressure and they've just basically caved in. And policymakers in both New Delhi and Washington have now, because of what's happened, they're being forced to confront actually whether they did mishandle Bangladesh in the wake of Hasina fleeing the country. And in the months leading up to the elections that happened in January, divisions did emerge within the US government over how to handle Bangladesh. And some in the US State Department did argue for a tougher stance against Hasina. They said, no, look, she is clearly anti-democratic. She is a danger to what we are, the principles that we stand up for, and that we must take a tougher stance against Hasina, particularly since Joe Biden had himself campaigned on a foreign policy plank of restoring democracy. Yet, other US officials felt there was little to be gained from alienating Hasina and risking the safety of US diplomats. So they took a bit of a cowardly line, it turns out. They said, look, we need to protect our diplomats, so let's go soft on our principles. And this is, don't forget, this is the same US that invaded foreign countries like Iraq to push what they call democratic values. Yet here they are, under a little pressure from India, caving in over Bangladesh. So White House officials also did consider the downside of antagonising India. They did actually weigh up this pressure coming from India. And India had made a series of appeals to the US that it moderate its pressure on Hasina, including when Jaishankar, that's the Indian Minister of External Affairs, when Jaishankar and the Defence Minister, Rajnath Singh, met with Antony Blinken and the Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin in November in New Delhi. So during those talks, clearly the Jaishankar and Rajnath Singh put Blinken under a huge amount of pressure, saying, back off, Hasina. And even, it turns out, Ajit Doval, yes, the NSA, the Indian NSA, who we talk about regularly, even he attended these talks in New Delhi. And clearly he waded in and put some pressure on Antony Blinken. And the US approach to Bangladesh was always one that tried to be consistent with our values, according to India. But also the US had to be pragmatic about the reality that the situation in Bangladesh was very complicated and there were a number of interests that the US had there that other countries had there. So the US had to, they claimed, take an approach that was, it was a bit of a balance between trying to appear to be democratic and pushing democratic values, but actually there was the pragmatic element of, we still need to stay friends with India. But for India, it did turn a spotlight on its decade-long all-in bet on Hasina. We've talked about the ties between the RSS BJP governments in India and the Hasina government in Bangladesh, and of course the far right seemed to ally quite closely with Hasina's way of doing things, and even as she became autocratic and unpopular. But for the US, it did create this growing dilemma while India is seen by the Biden administration as a crucial partner, of course, in countering China, as we've talked about a lot, India itself is increasingly viewed, it turns out, by its smaller neighbours in South Asia as what they call a meddling, aggressively nationalist power under Narendra Modi. Now, India, it turns out, is losing friends in the region. We do know this, and we have reported it regularly. So, after Hasina did claim victory in January in what really was seen as a one-sided election, because many of her opponents ended up in jail or in hiding, Indian officials endorsed that election result. Of course they did, because they saw Hasina as one of their own in many ways. But around the region, in geopolitical terms, the Maldives, Mohamed Muizzu, he rose to power as president by campaigning on an India out platform. India has tried to get involved in Maldivian politics, and the Maldive population basically threw out the whole concept. We do not want to be friends with India. We do not align with Indian values. So they appointed an unfriendly to India regime in the Maldives. Likewise in Sri Lanka, anti-Indian sentiment has flared this year after Modi claimed on his campaign trail that his opponents gave India's rightful territory cheaply away to Sri Lanka. So even in Sri Lanka, again, its neighbour has formed a pretty anti-BJP stance as well, and an anti-India. I would say anti-India, it's primarily anti-BJP RSS stance. And even a retired US diplomat, a guy called John Danilovitz, he said in response to all this that New Delhi and Washington do have to show some humility and acknowledge they have basically got the situation in Bangladesh wrong by not siding with the Bangladeshi people and their democratic aspirations. So even a diplomat from the sidelines, from probably a more pragmatic and even, I would dare say, a more independent view, he said, look, the US has got this wrong. The US has basically caved into Indian pressure, and they've backed this anti-democratic regime in Bangladesh. And they've ended up with egg on the faces because of what's happened. Now, since then, Modi, we do know, has sent his best wishes to Muhammad Yunus, the likely next leader of Bangladesh. And even that's despite the fact that Yunus has been quite critical of India in the past, particularly because of Modi's disinterest, should we say, in the uprising that finally ousted Hasina. And yet the US State Department has, I guess, with no choice, also endorsed Yunus as well. He's going to be the likely leader with the BNP. And India has started briefing Western governments that Bangladesh could become the next Afghanistan, that the BNP, the next likely government, could lead to instability, violence and terror. And they've been spinning this story. Clearly, the right wing of India and the RSS are already on the case. They're saying, look, hang on a second, whoa, the BNP. Of course, the right wing in India has this very strong anti-Islamic stance. They fear the Muslim population, which is part of the reason why they are so oppressive against the Muslim minority in India, that they're already briefing Western governments saying, oh, you let the BNP take charge in Bangladesh, and this is going to lead to instability, violence, and what they call terror. They're claiming that during the role of Hasina's rivals, the BNP in the mid-2000s, so when the BNP were last in power pre-Hasina, that militants smuggled weapons to attack northeast India and trained in camps inside Bangladesh with the help of Pakistani intelligence. Here we go again. This claim, this accusation that the ISI are getting involved, that the ISI are deliberately stirring up Islamic militants, not just in J&K, but also over here in the east, over in Bangladesh. Indian officials say that Indian and US officials say this experience with the BNP rule explained why India has been so adamant on keeping Hasina in power for so long, for 15 years. So basically they're saying that they're arguing that both India and US kept Hasina in power because they are saying that she was the lesser of two evils. They were saying if we had to choose between the BNP, who they argue would help develop Islamic militancy that could affect India, or do we choose this anti-democratic regime of Hasina? They chose the anti-democratic rule of Hasina, which unfortunately, as we've always said, James, democracy, people power always wins in the end. Without fail, throughout history, it doesn't matter which regime you ever look at throughout history, people power always wins in the end. It may take longer, it may take sooner, but the people always win in the end. So, this story about what's been going on behind the scenes, clearly Lots of issues come out of this, not least that it's shown a bit of weakness from the US front. The US, who have publicly across the global stage stood up for what they call democratic rights and have backed up that stance with military force on many occasions. Clearly, when it came to Bangladesh, they've caved in, and they've caved into Indian pressure because India have basically blackmailed the US and said, look, if you want us to align with you against China, you've got to align with us with our right-wing attitudes as well. So some interesting and complex dynamics going on there, James.
Absolutely. And when you look at the geopolitical situation in the region, I mean, India is obviously going to hedge its bets on who they think is going to be the most beneficial to the Modi government and his cronies. And at the end of the day, they're going to find any way to spin this into a narrative in which they can put it back on the U.S. government and these other governments that they're claiming are interfering with their system. So, I mean, we were already seeing it with so many other situations where Modi is playing politics on the international stage, but using leverage wherever he can get it. And this, once again, is just another power play by him to leverage the Bangladeshi people, the government, and probably to look at what he can get out of Bangladesh in the future.
Yeah, and I think that really is the salient point here. Is I think as we've said many times in the past, India does what's best for India. Its alliances are very fluid. Its alliances basically go wherever India's interests go. And they, of course, have an alliance with Russia, but when it suits them, they will have an alliance with the US. They swing backwards and forwards depending on what suits their interests at any given time, which is fine. It's great for India in many respects, but what it does mean, it means that the West cannot treat India as an ally. The West cannot rely or trust India. It cannot rely on or trust India because India will do what's best for India and not necessarily always aligns with Western interests. And again, we talk about Khalistan. I think this is another reason to argue for Khalistan from the Western perspective, is that the West desperately does need a regional stronghold, a foothold, an ally in that subcontinent area, in that Indian Ocean region. It needs some form of geographical foothold, should we say, that it can rely on when it comes to China, when it comes to at least some base in that area. And Khalistan forms that perfect power base. So as we always argue, I think it's certainly in the Western interest to push for a free and democratic Khalistan that would deeply align with Western interests on every level, whether it's democracy, financial, militarily, commercially, whatever. Khalistan does stand as a ready-made ally in that region for the West. So yeah, interesting dynamics going on that one. So we will, of course, let you know if anything further comes out on that one. So, okay, let's quickly move on as time marches on. Let's move on to my final story. And J&K, Jammu and Kashmir. Oh dear, yeah, what an interesting few decades it's been in J&K, certainly since partition. And the story marches on. 2019 saw J&K basically... we saw the constitution effectively ripped up and its own semi-autonomous status basically thrown out the window by the Supreme Court in a rubber-stamped decision. Narendra Modi took full control of J&K, threw out all its resident political leaders, either threw them into prison, put them under house arrest, basically got them out of the way, and took direct control of the whole region, much to the population's disgust and outrage, but there was nothing they could do about it. Any outcry, any dissent was immediately stamped on. Anybody who dared raise their head above the parapet was immediately stamped upon legally, militarily, forcefully by law enforcement, or they were basically imprisoned. They were intimidated, or they were imprisoned or detained. There was absolutely no democracy. But in an interesting development over the last few days, it has been announced that there are to be democratic elections in J&K. Wow, we hear you cry. We hear you cry. This is a great move, is it? Well, let's take a look at this story in a little bit more detail. So it has been announced that in J&K, local elections will be held for the first time in a decade. This has been announced by the head of the Electoral Commission after polls were stalled in the disputed region after direct rule was taken in 2019. Well, the Chief Election Commissioner, Rajiv Kumar, He told reporters back in New Delhi that after a long gap, elections are due and will be held in J&K. Voting for the region's assembly will be staggered over 3 stages between September the 18th and October the 1st, and a total of 8.7 million people will be eligible to vote. Ballots from around the region will be counted all at once on October the 4th and are usually announced on the same day. Now, the Muslim majority region has been divided between India and Pakistan since, of course, partition in 1947, and each side does claim the whole area in full. Now, some see the polls as a critical step in returning the vote to the people to choose their own leaders, but critics do say that the 90-seat assembly will only have nominal powers over areas like education and culture. But critical decisions, basically the decision-making that matters, will still rest in New Delhi's hands. So clearly, this is a democracy on New Delhi's terms, not a democracy in the traditional sense. And even some hardline separatists who demand independence for Kashmir, or its merger at least with New Delhi's arch-rival Pakistan, they oppose these very elections because they say it lends validity to Indian control. They're saying, look, these elections are totally pointless. If you go along with these elections, you're essentially endorsing New Delhi's control over this. So there is an absolute argument to say that even holding these even semi-democratic elections, if there's such a thing, is that there's no point even supporting them, because all you're doing is you're actually endorsing what New Delhi are doing. You're actually giving them credibility, when in fact this is absolutely undemocratic. And these hardline separatists, they're saying they're actually demanding a full referendum to decide the future of the region that contains around 12 million people. So, like in the Punjab, these separatists in J&K are saying, look, no. If you want real democracy, if you are real believers in democracy like you claim in New Delhi, then you absolutely have to give us a referendum, like you must give a referendum in the Punjab for a potential Khalistan. Then in J&K, you likewise must give us a democratic right of self-determination. And we do know that 500,000 Indian troops have been deployed in this region. They've had to, because this is how Indian democracy works. If you don't agree with Indian democracy as dictated by New Delhi, then they will pour 500,000 troops into your region. And we do know that elections for 5 seats were held in the recent parliamentary elections in June, and that vote actually saw a 58.6% turnout. That's a 30% point jump from the last vote in 2019, and the highest actually in 35 years. Key separatist leaders who previously called for an election boycott are now currently in jail. That's interesting, mirroring what happened in the Punjab. I seem to recall that Amritpal Singh, a key separatist leader who has also called for a separatist referendum, he also resides in jail. It's funny how Indian democracy works, isn't it? And the last assembly election was in 2014, when BJP entered into a ruling coalition with the People's Democratic Party, and that assembly was dissolved in 2018 after the BJP pulled out. Here we go. It was all part of a staged process. So the BJP pulled out of that coalition. The coalition unsurprisingly collapsed, and then the following year, Modi's government cancelled the partial autonomy of the region and turned it into a federally administered union territory. So, and that changed, of course, the stalled planned polls, and since then there have been no local level lawmakers. Instead, it's been run by a New Delhi appointed governor. So basically, the whole process of this, and I won't even call it democracy, the whole process of rule in J&K has been a staged mess up. It's been deliberately staged by the BJP to take full control of J&K. They always resented this ability to have at least some self-autonomy, some level of autonomy that was written into the Constitution in 1947. Yeah, there's a lot that goes back to the Constitution in 1947. The BJP and the RSS have never liked the situation of both the Punjab and J&K. They've never liked the fact that these northwestern regions that abut Pakistan, they never liked the fact that they potentially could separate. So they've always had this agenda to try and control them, usually through force, through violence and through force and deep oppression. They've done every possible multilateral approach to dilute the voices of the indigenous population, whether it's in the Punjab and the Sikhs, and whether it's the Muslims in the J&K. They've done everything to pour in people from the rest of India, Hindus particularly, to be able to buy up land, to dilute the indigenous voices, to ensure that the Hindu voice actually rises in power, to get into the schools and re-educate, as that's a Chinese term, re-educate those children, the next generation, into a different way of thinking, into more aligned thinking with New Delhi. These are tactics straight out of China and Tibet. So, unfortunately, democracy doesn't happen in northwest India. Democracy is imposed by the boot, by the force of a rifle, by a police cap, by the truncheon, by torture chambers in police stations. This is how democracy works in northwest India, isn't it, James?
It is. And I mean, one of the questions we had in our comments recently was about the International Criminal Court and why it's not being utilized when it comes to J&K and other parts of India. And one of the questions is why the Americans aren't doing something. But just to give it a quick explanation, is that the International Criminal Court was set up under the Rome Statute. The Rome Statute was brought in during the Clinton administration. They had intended to join into the International Criminal Court. They signed an intent, but not an actual agreement. When down the road, Bush came into office, the U.S. pulled out of the International Criminal Court and the Rome Statute. Now the U.S., ever since Trump was in office, has basically stated that they have absolutely no authority over the U.S. when it comes to investigations. The U.S. does not recognize their power or their judicial rights, and therefore there's absolutely really nothing the U.S. can do to influence the International Criminal Court, since they do not recognize it as an international body now. So just in a nutshell, I just wanted to go back to that, but also it explains why the International Criminal Court has not received complaints from the U.S. in this and other situations about human rights in India and the deaths and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to touch on that quickly about this region. There's Angus.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. That's an interesting insight. And we talk about Western hypocrisy. I do, not to get sidetracked on this, but I think that's another area of Western hypocrisy. And I think there was a cynical view on the reason the US pulled out of that was essentially because of their military activities globally. They didn't want their soldiers subjected to that sort of accountability. Rightly or wrongly, I don't know. One could argue might is right once again. I don't know, but there were a lot of critics of that decision who argued that that is a pretty cynical way to avoid oversight and accountability of US troops operating overseas. Don't know, maybe a good thing, bad thing, but I think that's a discussion for another time. But we are against the clock. We are against the clock as always. Let's move on to our comments, and lots of comments coming in. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for those. First comment I just wanted to highlight from Surjit Kondal. You made this comment, Angus, your programme I can't find all the time. Yeah, you're not the only person who has said this. We have talked about being shadow banned, this fairly nefarious goings-on the internet. And we do know, as we've said on many occasions, that we believe, shadow banned by potentially YouTube. And we think there are all sorts of dodgy goings-on behind the scenes, because we do know still some of our comments do disappear. And we do know that people sometimes struggle to find not just our channel, but specific videos. We do know this happens with other channels as well. And we talked about the CIA analyst, the ex-analyst who was interviewed, a very fascinating interview where she revealed that India was paying the Taliban to assassinate Islamic militants and Sikhs. And that interview was a lot of people said it was very difficult to find, that indeed was being shadow banned. So we do know it happens. We do know, and people have commented, look, we're trying to find your latest videos, and they don't seem to be there. Well, I can assure you they are there. It's just that clearly YouTube is hiding some of them and making it a lot harder to find them. All I would say is subscribe to the channel. And then I think, and if you look at all our videos, they do tend to come up when you click on all videos. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. Do let us know in the comments if you do encounter this. We have reported, and there is talk that a lot of workers in a lot of high-tech Silicon Valley companies, like of course Google, who own YouTube, there are a lot of Indians who work in those organizations who of course have the power of the behind-the-scenes coding. They have the power of controlling the algorithms. And I don't think it's too conspiratorial to predict that they are keeping an eye on channels like us and ensuring that channels like us don't quite get the fair hearing that one would expect on a free and fair internet. So yeah, thank you for that comment, and do let us know if you encounter it as well. Right, James, let's get on to the meat of the comments. Groel Sequinda, interesting comment here. Thank you for your comment. And the information you both discuss about Banana Republic of India is just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, I think it is. See how they micromanage Sikhs. They're sending drug dealers from the Punjab to Dibrugarh. This is, of course, is where Amritpal Singh is imprisoned without trial under very questionable circumstances. Now, I didn't know this, Groel. Thank you for letting us know that they are sending drug dealers from the Punjab to Dibrugarh to tarnish Amritpal's and his colleagues. He's not just alone there, trying to tarnish their image. Take a look at, of course, the doctor that we reported on, the rape case, and how awful that case was. Absolutely. No wonder that we like to have our own nation of Khalistan and lead a prosperous life and help others to do the same. Yeah, I could not put this point any better. I think, James, we only touch the surface of what goes on. Of course, we only can report on what we can find in the English language. You imagine, James, what we're missing that does actually happen in Hindi and Punjabi language. I guess there are big stories that we're missing even here.
Absolutely. And, we see a lot of things online that we can't corroborate or find verification of. So, I mean, there's a lot of the truth to those reports, but without proper verification, we're hesitant to bring some of them to air.
Yeah, and I think really this is where we rely on you, our wonderful audience, to bring these things to our attention, as indeed many of you have done. If there are stories that we need to know about and they're just in Punjabi, because quite often I do see quite interesting stories, but it's only written in Hindi or Punjabi, and we cannot rely on Google Translate to bring those stories to your attention. So if you indeed do see stories that we should know about, if you don't want to put them in the comments columns, as many of you do, please do keep doing that. Just send us an email, and we'll give the email address at the end of the show, as we always do. But send us an email, just send us a link. But don't send us a link to anything Punjabi. We can't understand it. If you can at least summarise in English, then we can report on those stories. So yeah, absolutely. We need to get the truth out there. We need to get the people in India, particularly in the Punjab, we need to let them know the truth of what is happening. So yeah, please let us know those stories. Azad says, a fresh inquiry. This, of course, is the potential inquiry in Canada into the Air India terrorist incident. A fresh inquiry will open the eyes of the world of how the Indian government operates. Transnational repression, defaming the Sikhs worldwide. Absolutely it will. We have talked about yesterday or the day before about this parliamentary petition in Canada. If you are in Canada, get your name on that petition. Spread the word across the whole Sikh diaspora and outside the Sikh diaspora. There must be a fresh inquiry into what happened in that terrorist bombing, that awful incident. It is believed that Indian intelligence were behind this. It can only be found out. The truth can only come out through the pressure of people. So yeah, get your name on that petition. And Cruella comes in at the end. Khalistan is our rightful claim. Absolutely it is. There are documents out there with proof. Indeed there are. We decided to go with India, but the agreement was voided as soon as the Indian government attacked the Amritsar Darbar Sahib. I think it was voided even before then, Cruella. I think ever since 1947 and onwards. I think the betrayal, as we have talked about in many of our podcasts, that betrayal happened the moment that the Constitution was signed. So I don't think even 1984 comes into it. I think it was even before then. But absolutely, the Guru is attacked daily. Of course, the Holy Scriptures, the non-living Guru, the final Guru, the eternal Guru, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, has been under attack regularly since then. No one is safe in occupied Punjab. No, they are not, as we report regularly. Any Sikh that doesn't feel that Khalistan needs to be freed, they are no Sikh of Guruji. Absolutely, couldn't put it better myself. Right, James, your story about the Olympic team being rewarded financially. SSI Singh is very suspicious, and SSI Singh says, is that money just an announcement, or will they really receive that money? Awesome, James. Some nice clean work. Well, do you think they will receive that money, James?
I don't know. That's something that we'll have to watch, but I don't know that we'll ever know the truth, to be honest with you. No matter how much we dig or others, it's going to be hard, but let's hope that they do. I like to be a positive thinker.
Yeah, well, we will keep faith in the Chief Minister that his checks will not bounce, that those checks will be honoured. We'll see. Now, Nirmal Singh, dear Angus, I'm from Australia. Can I sign the petition? Unfortunately, I don't believe you can. I think because it is a petition to the Canadian Parliament, I believe that only Canadian citizens will be allowed to sign that petition, which is a shame. But that is not to say that you in Australia cannot petition the Australian Parliament, because of course Australia is a democracy along exactly the same lines as Canada, as indeed the UK is. You have the right to pressure your own Member of Parliament in Australia to push for a petition. Now, I believe the Sikh diaspora in Australia is obviously not as large as it is in Canada, but nonetheless, there is a good, healthy population in Australia, and I don't think there is any reason that you yourself cannot push your own community to petition your own MP and have. I mean, how powerful would that be if across the diaspora is that same petition was pushed across Australia, the UK, Canada and the US? Imagine how powerful that pressure would be upon the Canadian government if there was a petition across the whole Western world, indeed the Five Eyes. That's the key here, the Five Eyes nations. If they all were under pressure from the people to say, look, you guys, we know there's a lot more going on here than you're letting on. You must open a fresh inquiry. Who knows? Bigger things have happened. So,
one way or the other,
yes, sorry, James. Carry on, James.
Oh, I just said that one way or the other, the truth needs to be known. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely, it must. And again, I always talk about people power. Unfortunately, the truth will only ever come out through the force of people power. Let me go full circle to the story today about the owner of the Sunday Guardian, whose son got off the murder charge. The only reason he got off the murder charge, he finally was found guilty, was people power. That's the only way to tackle the rich and powerful, those in charge. The only way they will ever be forced to change or bend or break is through people power. And that's why the people on the ground, all of us, must unite, not be divided. That's why they try to divide us. They know their biggest. We outnumber them massively. We have the power. It's very simple. All of us have the power to push against the small number of powerful and wealthy. But it can only come when we unite. So don't be divided, as indeed was the message from the Jathedar of the Akal Takht, truth-sayer. This is a wonderful segue onto this comment. Where can we read the statement from the Jathedar, Jani Raghbar Singh of the Akal Takht? Of course, that statement said, do not be divided, stop being divided. We must unite because we are more powerful as a united voice. They are trying to divide us because they know that's the only way they can defeat us. So don't let that happen. We must unite. Now, in answer, truth-sayer, to your question, unfortunately, I don't believe that statement is a formal written statement anywhere. It was actually given out in a press conference, or at least it was a verbal address to the Panth, and unfortunately, I don't think a written statement was released with those words. It actually came from one of our own reporters in the Punjab who told us, who basically wrote down what was said and passed on to us to report. So unfortunately, if you Google search it, certainly in English, I cannot find any statement that confirms those words. So I'm sorry, we can't help with that one. Harbinder Sandy says, to see show, I wait every day curiously. Well, thank you for your support. I love to watch Sikh perspectives from both James and Angus. I would request, James, you're being requested to interview some of the third or fourth or even fifth generation Sikhs living in BC and their struggles and achievements. Thanks to both of you. Well, James, your thoughts?
I did actually respond to this one personally, and it's definitely something that I think is worth exploring. So if there are people out there in the Surrey or Metro Vancouver, Fraser Valley area that would like to sit down and have a discussion, by all means, send us a message, messages at Savage TV, and I would be more than happy to reach out and see if we can arrange something.
Absolutely. So if you are resident in BC and you've got an interesting story to tell, send us an email. We'll forward it to James and James can have that discussion with you. Great stuff. And final set of comments. This was in answer to our question to you, our audience. Is our show too long? Are we, because there have been criticisms, it's too long. People's lives are just too busy and they can't fit an hour and, well, however many minutes we are now into their lives. Well, a wonderful show of support from all of you. And a selection here. Raj Verk says, your show is not too long. Manny says, your show is perfectly fine as it is. We love it. KK says, I think it's not too long. I really enjoy your show. Cruella says, I don't think the show is too long. And Cruella even says, if anyone thinks it's too long, they can speed it up on their device. Actually, this is a great idea. I only discovered this myself recently, not being very technical, but apparently you can speed up when you watch a YouTube video. So if you want to zip through, I think you can speed it up. I don't know how many times, maybe 1.5 times or 2 times. So if we're talking like Mickey Mouse, then you must be watching us on high speed. But great tip. Thank you for that, Cruella. Charanjit Atwal says, all the Sikhs around the world are listening to your programme. You should have more time. And even Gurpreet says, please continue the way that you're doing and will be great if you can extend the time. Well, all I would say to our wonderful audience is firstly, thank you for your support, but don't tempt us. James and I, we could talk for hours, but I'm sure it would bore you senseless if we did just witter on even more, James. What do you think?
We have a hard enough time keeping it under an hour, so don't dare us. We'll keep you listening for hours.
Indeed. And I think today's show is comfortably over the hour mark. We originally, we did try to keep it to 28 minutes, but as you can see, we fell miserably. Then we said, okay, we'll keep it to an hour. And as you can see, we're always comfortably over an hour. So this is our attempt at trying to keep it to an hour. So don't let us go to 2 hours, or you may be stuck with us for 3 hours. So, but yes, anyway, thank you so much for all those comments. They are gratefully received. Absolutely, but unfortunately, yes, talking about time, we have been beaten by the clock well and truly once again today, so we must draw things to a close. But do keep those comments coming in, as you know, we do very much appreciate them. We love your comments, even the nasty ones and the critical and the rude ones, but especially we love your educational comments and your informative comments, even ones to correct us, so do keep those coming in. But in the meantime, we must draw Perspectives to a close for another day. Don't forget, as I mentioned earlier, you can message us directly if you don't want to put anything in the public comments. Message us directly at message@satledgetv.com, and of course we do like to hear from you on the email as well. But in the meantime, that is it for Perspectives for another day. It is goodbye from me, and it is goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you on another occasion. Cheers. Bye bye.